Okay, and we are live. Welcome everyone to Tetrate Tech Talks. This is a very special episode. My name is Eitan Suez. I work for Tetrate. For those of you who have attended our previous episodes, I'd like to welcome you back. For those of you who are coming, and if you're visiting us for the first time, I'd like to welcome you to our special episode, a Fireside Chat on Envoy Gateway. My name is Eitan Suez, and I come to you straight from Valencia, Spain. In fact, from the hallways of the conference center, and we've got a very, very special episode for you. And I would like to bring on our guests, who perhaps do not need much of an introduction: Matt Klein, Louis Ryan, Joe Beda, and Varun Talwar, the CEO of our company. And here they are. So maybe the best place to begin is to, even though I don't think this is really necessary, but let's just go ahead and do the due diligence and ask each of you in turn. Maybe we'll start with Matt, to introduce yourselves to the audience, and then we'll go into the interview proper.
Hey everyone, thanks very much for having me. My name is Matt Klein. I'm a software engineer at Lyft, where for the last 7+ years, amazingly, I've been working on Envoy. I'm the founder of the Envoy project. And I work on infrastructure things at Lyft, and obviously I do a lot of industry and CNCF stuff related to Envoy. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Joe, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Joe Beda. I'm a principal engineer at VMware. I helped get the Kubernetes project started. And my job at VMware really is about pulling together a lot of our technical architecture and direction around Tanzu. As much as I can. Like anything with software engineers, it's herding cats. My presence here is really probably related to Contour. This is a Envoy-based ingress controller that we started at my startup Heptio, and have continued to invest in here at VMware. I'm not necessarily the one driving the project, but I kind of sponsor it, or at least help to fit it in with the rest of what we're doing with Tanzu.
Yes, of course. And Louis, would you like to go next?
Hi, I'm Louis Ryan. I'm a software engineer here at Google. Well, coming to you live from KubeCon, so please excuse the background noises. And I have no headphones, so it's going to be pretty bad when I speak. So I am the lead for the Istio efforts at Google and the service mesh related efforts, and a bunch of kind of connected things to that, both on the Google platform and in Anthos. I've been working on Istio since the project started, and with Matt for a very long time, since basically he created Envoy, and that's what I did.
Thank you. And last but not least, Varun.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me. My name is Varun. I'm co-founder of Tetrate, and prior to that, I helped start Istio with Louis, actually back from my days at Google. We are here because we are building a platform on top of Envoy and Istio to help companies adopt service mesh. And this is an important piece in the stack. So excited about this.
Yes. Well, thank you all for joining. I really
Is it just you and me, Matt?
I think so.
I think the entirety of KubeCon probably went offline.
Not quite sure what to do now. Do we just wait until they come back?
Yeah, maybe I have the list of questions that I know is looking to. Let me pull that up. Continue on.
So I'm guessing that the conference internet is not very good.
No, it's like all conference internet. It's rough.
Okay, got it.
Let's give them a few seconds. I think the first.
Oh no.
Yeah,
they're all gone. I think maybe the internet just completely dropped.
Yeah. Spain's still online. Well, I think the first question I think he was going to ask is, what's the reason for the Envoy Gateway project, right? Why is this happening? So I'll ask this of you, Matt. We'll
Sure. Yeah,
show
we
what's
can just
go on here.
chat about that. Yeah. All right. Well, let's see. So I guess for those of you that don't know out there, or maybe most of you do, Envoy, we've been open source for six years or so at this point, and much to my amazement, the deployment of Envoy is really pretty much everywhere, but it's everywhere mostly among large enterprises. So we have pervasive deployment around the world with large organizations that have relied on Envoy for a lot of different reasons, whether it's the amazing community or the feature set or the API-driven configuration model. So it's been really amazing to see just, again, how many people are using Envoy for API gateway use cases, for service mesh use cases, for interior load balancing use cases. The flip side of that is that we have not seen very large deployment of Envoy in what I would call smaller and simpler use cases. So the average developer that wants to set up an ingress controller for their smaller Kubernetes cluster, they're typically not using Envoy today. Or if they are, they might be using one of the many projects that have grown up around Envoy, whether that be Contour or Ambassador Emissary, or there's lots of other ingress controllers based on Envoy. And I think from a project perspective, we've heard a lot of feedback from customers out there, that they really appreciate the Envoy brand, but the Envoy project itself is just simply too low level. It's a very complex piece of software. And one of the things that we're trying to do with Envoy Gateway is to figure out how can we bring the community together to make a reference implementation of an ingress controller. So that's part one. And then part two, how do we build on the momentum behind the Kubernetes Gateway API and define, the de facto APIs that people are going to use to run Envoy within Kubernetes? And how can we, really bring that Envoy, let's call it Envoy branded experience, or, the Envoy feature set to a larger number of people that today might not be able to experience it because, again, the project in its base form is a bit too low level. So a couple months ago, we thought about starting this project, and it was very important to me from a community perspective that we did not leave behind the existing companies and projects that have built on Envoy. Envoy has become very popular and successful because we've created this amazing ecosystem of different companies and different projects that have built on Envoy. So it was very important to me from a community perspective that we do not leave those folks behind. So the existing ingress controllers in CNCF are obviously Contour and Ambassador. And we started conversations with the VMware team. We started conversations with Ambassador Labs. And I'm going to be honest, 3 months ago, I did not think that we could get this together. I just thought it would be too complicated. But, we did a lot of talking and a lot of conversations, and we actually got everyone to believe that if we can do this well, it can really, I think, lead to a rising tide lifts all boats phenomenon, which is that we can get more people coming into the Envoy ecosystem. We can reduce a ton of duplication of effort. It seems, quote, simple to build an ingress controller on top of Envoy, but it's not. I mean, there's a lot of shared concerns around security and control plane, and the list goes on and on and on. And we see that not only are all of the OSS, projects duplicating this effort. At this point, we probably have hundreds of companies and organizations that have built custom ingress controllers on Envoy, and they're all duplicating the effort. So if we can build that reference implementation, and if we can come in and hopefully provide a base piece of functionality, we can not only hit some of these simpler use cases, we can help define, again, what the API looks like, so that we can also enable different vendors, whether they be cloud SaaS solutions, to offer their own Envoy-based ingress controllers based on the API. But then we can also allow vendors to really add value at the next layer, at the management plane layer, whether that be through better UI, UX, API management, the list goes on and on and on. So to summarize, very excited to kick off this project. I think it's going to be great for the larger community. I think we're going to be able to capture a lot more of the average smaller user who is not using Envoy today. They might be using a different ingress controller. I'm biased. I think Envoy is a better technology. So I think that we can get people a better experience when they're doing ingress, and we can reduce duplication of effort. And then we can enable vendors and cloud providers, to really provide value at that next layer. And that's, again, just going to be a better experience for everyone.
Thanks, Matt. I apologize for dropping off. I suppose I should reiterate that this project, as it was announced, is a collaboration between VMware, Ambassador Labs, Tetrate, and Fidelity. And it's really an open invitation for the rest of the community to join and collaborate on the project. And I'm keen to delve into this partnership. It feels a little bit like sort of the Fellowship of the Ring, where diverse parties come together for a common good. Feels like a noble quest. Is this an example where open source shines, perhaps? Maybe people coming together to create an open platform that the entire community will benefit from?
Well, I mean, I'll answer that. I think, from the Contour point of view, it's one of these things where I think this is how open source should be done, where you have to be, thoughtful about what are my goals? Why are we doing this? From both a business point of view and a community point of view. And, when we were looking at Contour, I mean, the original purpose of Contour is very well aligned with this project. It's like, how can we provide actually it was at the prompting of Tim Hawken. He's like, hey, we kind of need an ingress controller based on Envoy. And this was pre-Istio actually. And so we started Contour in reaction to that. And the purpose of it has always been to be, as simple and straightforward a ingress controller on top of Envoy as possible. And this is really just a continuation of that. Now, we did over time go beyond ingress and start introducing a new set of CRDs that I think have informed, along with ideas from others, the Gateway API. And so it's really all these things coming together. But if our goal was to provide that very simple to use, well supported ingress gateway implementation on top of Envoy, this project and people coming together is going to serve those needs versus continuing to go forward with the Contour project. But along the way, there's a little bit of it's a bittersweet type of thing, because there's a lot of folks who have worked to actually build the brand around it. It's something that they've put a lot of time into. And, there's definitely a looking at it through the lens of well, what is the right path forward, taking that sort of that history out of it. So hopefully that makes sense what I'm rambling on about there.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. And I have a similar question for Varun. I'd like. Okay, Varun, what is Tetrate's motivation for joining this collaboration? Maybe something along similar lines, or what were the sort of trade-offs, so to speak, in terms of going it alone versus just being part of a larger thing?
Yeah, I think the idea of consolidation, the idea of so Tetrate is basically building on top of we believe in this application networking stack. We were already building everything on top of Envoy, and as Matt mentioned, this will give vendors, cloud providers a choice to build value above in management planes. We actually build a management plane as Tetrate, and when we talked to end users, there were a couple of things that were happening. One is everybody had a different ingress controller or that they were using, and there's I have this clusters in different places with different ingresses. Why is there such a diversification? Why is there not more unification here, which will make my job easier as a customer, and obviously for us as a provider of management plane also becomes the job easier. So I think that was one simple motivation, and we didn't want to be the next the 101st ingress controller in the market after.
Makes sense.
So, right. So I think it does take a lot of effort and thoughtful thinking to sort of steer sort of things in the right direction. But I think, as Joe said, this is the right way to do open source in the sense of everyone agreeing the long-term good and making sort of way for it. And having somebody like an end user, which we don't generally see, I think is also a very good thing because that drives the direction and requirements from end user point of view right from the start, as opposed to like, let's build it and throw it off the wall and hope someone will get to use it is not the best model.
Yeah. And when I initially tried to wrap my head around the idea for the project Envoy Gateway, so the first question that popped into my mind is, okay, how is this different from, for example, what Istio does vis-a-vis Envoy? I suppose one could make the case that in some respects, Istio is a facade maybe for Envoy, that you don't have to know Envoy, but you configure it, and it's a lot easier to configure than configuring Envoy by itself. How is Envoy Gateway perhaps different from Istio? And I guess the question is perhaps primarily intended for Louis, but we all feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I mean, so, as far as the Envoy Gateway overall effort goes, right, I mean, Google and Istio are huge proponents of Envoy. Like, we've worked and have been using Envoy extensively, both in the project and in Google in commercial SaaS solutions for many years now. And so we had worked hard on the Gateway API specification as part of Kubernetes to help drive a better standardization space, right? But obviously, there's kind of limits to what that can do, and being, that has to be completely solution neutral. So, it's encouraging to see an effort like Envoy Gateway where, some of the additional value add that Envoy can bring to certain use cases get standardized. And, obviously there are many solution providers out there, as Matt mentioned, that provide Envoy-based, whether it's a sidecar in a service mesh or an ingress or an egress or something like that, that they could participate and provide that solution. And Istio is just one of those, right? So Istio is a network control plane. You can use it for service mesh. You can use it for ingress. We certainly do that internally at Google and in our products, and you can use it for egress. So, we view this as an effort, as something that Istio can support, right? That's how we look at it. Just like we have added support for the Gateway APIs for the same reason. Right? So we just view it as a kind of natural extension of that work.
Yes, that makes perfect sense to me. My main observation when I started looking at the Kubernetes Gateway API is the similarity in design between it and what I see in Istio. So that's always encouraging, and probably will make easy a transition to support that API as well. Now, for the benefit of our audience, I'm really curious to ask. I love to ask more of a historical question. I suspect many of you were at Google working together. Perhaps I don't know the history, but now here you are, still collaborating, working together, even though you're across multiple organizations. And I was hoping to somehow impart to our audience a little bit of that history of your relationship.
Sorry, I would just like to say that I have never worked at Google.
That's right, Matt. You're the exception.
I've also,
That's a point of pride for Matt.
In fact, I throughout my career, I interviewed at Google twice, and I got rejected both times.
Are you like the Ringo Starr of this band?
I just wanted to set the record straight there.
Never
Gotcha.
say never, right?
All right.
I
we
think,
still love you.
There's this saying, I think, it's always fascinating when somebody leaves a company and they work in open source and they go join some other company in the same area, which is not uncommon, is that, folks like to say, different company, same team. And it's sort of an interesting perspective here is that, look, I think we've had, disagreements amongst the folks here, like different ways of approaching things. The path for Istio into the CNCF has been an interesting one, right? But I think that there's generally this idea that persists that, careers are long, and you view your relationship with others through lenses beyond just, sort of, sports team tribalism that often happens with companies, right? There is this larger community that you actually relate to folks with and work with. And I think, that's always good to see. And it makes it easier to find those win-win situations like what's happening here with Envoy Gateway.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing, all the people, I've worked with Joe when Joe was at Google, certainly with Varun very closely when he was at Google. All of these people that I work with, both inside and then outside of Google, have had a very long and durable commitment to open source, right? And that's the thing that when I meet people in the community, it's the people who are willing to kind of make the 5-year commit, right? Or I guess, Matt, like the 7-year or 10-year or however long you're going to be piling on Envoy. It's a commitment, right? And we also have to recognize that like projects and relationships within those projects are going to change over time, but that commitment stays. And that's the thing that I like about open source is you can retain that commitment even if you change what you're doing or who you're doing it for.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah.
Like community is all about people. So
Yeah, that sums it up.
That's people build it, and other people follow other people in terms of even when the end users think about what to do. So and community is all about people doing the right thing, right? It crosses corporate and company boundaries, and that's how it should be.
It's about people, but the one thing that I would add is that I take a very pragmatic approach to open source, and particularly this type of open source, which is that, yes, we have lots of people come together and we've done really amazing things, but at the same time, it takes corporate money in order to make these things happen. And that's just the honest reality. Like, this is not hobbyist open source. This is highly professional, highly paid open source. And the reason that I bring that up is that, coming back to what I mentioned before about why I wasn't willing to start this project without buy-in from the existing companies and projects, is that it's these companies and projects and their funding that actually makes all of this happen. So it's a very delicate dance, frankly, between, nurturing the larger community, but also making sure that there's companies and organizations that can make money from these projects, because that allows them to fund it. And it's the funding that really makes it happen. It's like, even if you look at Envoy, which is probably a fraction of the size of something like Kubernetes, the amount of money that it takes to run Envoy, both in salaries and infrastructure, is large. I mean, it would be, if you really added up all the money that's going into doing this, it is not a small number. So I am personally very cognizant, kind of like being a CEO of a company, of what it takes to maintain that funding, right? So there's lots of factors here, and it's a very complicated thing.
I mean, one thing I would say, Matt, is that as my career journey has taken me from like Google to, doing a startup and working with VCs to VMware, there's always a need to show how open source can actually be something that is both a common good based on these relationships, and actually can have positive impact on the business. And what I would say is that expansion of your world to being, instead of just sort of like, when it's so often in this industry, you join a company, you're within that company, your world is very much in that company. Expanding your view to be this community that crosses companies is a big necessary step to getting to being able to make that case and really have people understand that open source is not a threat. It's actually a force multiplier for businesses. And I think, all of us here, we have to walk that line where we talk about, hey, this is both a business good, and actually there's places for us to actually play into the community and have something that's more durable along those lines.
Yes, and I suppose this project is no exception, right? In that, it's going to have to, there are going to be engineers who are going to be working on implementing this common implementation of Envoy Gateway, and it's going to take some funding and some all of that. Right, absolutely.
Yeah, one thing which often doesn't get talked about and is very, very relevant to this topic is at the end of the day, customers and end users are winning in this whole play, right? Because if they were to get what they're getting out of enclosed softwares, that would be a way more expensive proposition for them, all the way from learning to usage to adoption to support. So at the end of the day, they are winners in that in this whole open source ecosystem, both short term and long term. And frankly, open source is more valuable than closed source. It's like way less riskier, right, than buying anything closed. And I often tell people like open source should be more expensive than closed, than not the other way around. And but that's just a level of maturity that and the way you look at it. But at the end of the day, yes, money drives all of the funding for all the effort, but it's sustaining because the value to end user is getting delivered.
All right, I want to turn my attention to something I remember, Joe. I'm going to try to paraphrase something I learned from you by watching you talk about Kubernetes, how this idea of iterating on a design. Kubernetes has so many facets, and ingress is only one of them. And there was maybe an initial attempt with a load balancer type service, and then the noticing there was a need for something more, such as the ingress CRD. And here we are again, maybe with a third iteration with the Kubernetes Gateway API, which is still in alpha stages. So it's definitely not set in stone as it currently exists. But my question to you is, are we getting closer to something that's really going to be a design that you can actually say, wow, all right, I'm pleased with what we ended up with now?
Well, I think early on with Kubernetes, we looked at the if you can sort of turn your mind back, I don't know, if our viewers were paying attention then, but like when Docker first hit the scene and there were all these different projects and ideas going on there. Brendan Burns, one of the other Kubernetes co-founders, used to say that, like, hey, look, we're all playing with the same puzzle pieces, but because of Google's experience with Borg, we actually have the picture on the front of the box. We know how this stuff can come together. And so we kind of had a leg up with Kubernetes in terms of we had an example that and experiences through internal systems at Google around Borg that we could then actually use to very much influence the way that we built Kubernetes. Except for networking. It turns out that networking inside of Google was different enough, and that the systems for doing load balancing, both internal and external, were not well integrated with Borg. And so as we knew we needed to do a networking system for Kubernetes, but it was our first shot at it, and we didn't necessarily have that picture on the front of the box as we did some of the networking stuff. And so you see that through things like the service APIs, where it's everything in the kitchen sink in the one service object. You see that through ingress, which is way underspecified. And we've learned as we went. And I think, and it's one of these things where, and I think this is a truism across software, is that you got to make something that sucks first before you can make something that's good. And it's just, whether it's artwork or software or whatever, you have to get started, you have to learn, you have to iterate. And I do think that with the gateway APIs, we've learned a ton of lessons. We're applying those things. Are they going to be perfect? Nothing ever is. But I think that, over time, as you build this stuff, you kind of find these elegant solutions. You find these universal truths. But it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of iteration. And I think that's what we're seeing now.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. So the Envoy Gateway project, I think that's an initial milestone, is to use the Kubernetes Gateway API as sort of the the first facet or the first step towards maybe a larger objective, also making ingress available in other environments? Is Kubernetes it, or are we going to see this implementation carry to other environments, other scopes, virtual machines, perhaps, or being able to deploy it standalone or what have you? What's the vision, the long term? I mean, for the Envoy Gateway project.
Yeah,
I can
this is
start.
yeah, Matt, go ahead. I think yeah.
I think the initial goal of the project is definitely kube focused, right? It's like we would definitely like to make an Envoy-based Kubernetes ingress controller based on the Gateway API that is really nice to use. With that said, I believe that we should be able to take the majority of these APIs and run them on different types of infrastructures. So I think that's a secondary goal of the project, because as successful as Kubernetes is, there's still people that are not using Kubernetes or want to run it in different types of deployment scenarios. And my personal goal, and I'm not actually going to claim to know how realistic this is, but I believe, or my intuition would tell me, that 99% of the API surface can be shared, between a non-Kubernetes instance and a Kubernetes instance. So I think the goal is to nail Kubernetes, and then we would evolve into running on different types of infrastructures, hopefully sharing as much of the API as possible. Because again, going back to what I said before, is there's the reference implementation, and then there's the API standardization. And if we can standardize the higher layer APIs, it really unlocks a lot of potential among all the different SaaS providers or PaaS providers. So I think we would like to do that first, but I'm sure the other folks on this call have their own thoughts on this.
Well, I think, one trend we're seeing in the Kubernetes community, and I think, there's this project that's mostly being driven by Red Hat called KCP, is to extract out a lot of the API sort of control plane patterns in Kubernetes and make those usable in a place where there's no container in sight. And so, and we're also seeing through operator patterns where it's like, so many places where folks are reusing Kubernetes API infrastructure and ideas, the idea of reconcilers and CRDs, to domains for configuring and managing things that aren't running on Kubernetes. And so I think it's totally reasonable for us to think about, can you run something that's Kubernetes control plane like, but with no kubelets, no containers in sight, as a runtime to be able to host a gateway API where the targets that you're pointing Envoy at, and the place that Envoy is running is not on Kubernetes, but could be VMs, could be who knows what else, right? And I think there's a ton of opportunity there, not just for this project, but for a lot of other projects to actually reuse a lot of these ideas outside of the strictly Kubernetes context.
Yeah, and this also comes back to, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, very concretely speaking, right, as Google, right, we run a lot of managed load balancer solutions, using Envoy infrastructure, programmed, using the gateway APIs, whether it's the edge load balancer or an internal load balancer, right, in front of a Kubernetes cluster or even in front of a set of VMs. And that design pattern that Joe referred to, companies starting to use Kubernetes as a kind of configuration management platform, as well as a compute management platform, has really taken hold in the industry, right, as a whole.
Yeah, and on that topic, I would say two things. So Envoy has its own API called the Xds Api, and similar to what Louis was just saying about the Kube API being used elsewhere, we see now XDS actually being used outside of Envoy. The publicly known one is gRPC, but we also know of several different instances of people using XDS to configure, proprietary systems. And the other thing that I would add, and this goes back to what Joe was saying around, the old days in Google where the networking, it worked differently than what they did in Borg, or it didn't translate as well to what they were doing in Kube. Is Envoy itself has no dependency on Kube at all. In fact, the word Kubernetes appears nowhere within Envoy. So Envoy is a very generic networking solution. So from Envoy perspective, we're talking about a common set of nouns and verbs of doing things, but these types of networking concepts, they tend to really be decoupled from the orchestration platform. So just from a technical perspective, it's not even particularly difficult, to do something with this type of ingress controller that would be decoupled from Kube.
Yeah, I see a comment. Yeah, go ahead, Varun.
I mean, this is such a fascinating conversation for me, because I mean, as Tetrate was focusing on, so we say our mission is power the world's application traffic, but as somebody who focus only on like traffic problem and not on the compute problem of, and we think of like Kubernetes is handles compute. This is a super interesting conversation of like, Envoy is XDS is the reason why Envoy is so popular, one of the big reasons, and that's the most used API, and that's the standardized API there. And we ourselves, as when we build our management plane and stuff, we use Kubernetes as a configuration management system, like many other do. And I think it's actually it will be over the years more popular as being used for that as for container orchestrator. That's just what I think. May or may not be true.
Yeah, I have said many times that I firmly believe that the current Envoy code base will go away in a smaller fraction of the time in terms of the Xds API. I think the Xds API will be with us for a long, long, long time, and Envoy itself will get buried or go away in a much shorter period of time.
Yeah, there's a truism in our industry, like, APIs and data formats outlive code every time, right?
Yeah, that's very true. And on
yeah,
that
the
note,
amount of FTP and CSV that still exists in the world is outrageous.
Yeah, only 640K is gone. Yeah, which is not an API. But, so I'd like to surface a question.
If we can make Envoy Gateway API, live as long, that would be success.
Yeah. So I'd like to surface a question that came up in the comments. I'm going to show it here on the screen. My understanding was that this effort is actually intended to solve the fragmentation that exists today, where we have multiple duplication of talent and multiple implementations of ingress solutions based on Envoy. But go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Ira, how's it going? So I mean, the Istio community, right, has been heavily involved in working and defining the Kubernetes Gateway API, as were the folks from Contour, et cetera, right? So we're very invested in the Gateway API as the future, right, for Istio, both for the ingress use case and the service mesh use case, right? So that hopefully represents some consolidation that people can recognize. And then
so there is no Envoy Gateway API. The Envoy Gateway API is right. Is that what you're trying to say, Louis?
Yeah. So the Gateway API is the nexus of API here, right? And then it's specifically designed to allow for extensions, right? Whether they're for a specific solution or a vendor, right? And so it's designed to allow growth and expansion without the core being disturbed, right? And so I'm committed to Istio providing first-class support for the Gateway API as a basis for all of its function. And then if we add extensions to it, or Envoy adds standardized extensions for the capabilities that it has that are maybe not covered by the Gateway API itself, then those could be standalone APIs that are as supportable as things in the core Gateway API itself. I think you'll also see, as features and functions become more standardized across solutions, that they will now become parts of the Gateway API itself, right? They'll kind of promote up into the bigger standards body, which is Kubernetes here, for want of a better term, right? So there's a huge amount of convergence actually occurring. Maybe that's not as clear right now in the messaging as it should be, but I just want to make sure that message gets out.
Yeah, I'm really glad you bring it up. I've wondered the same thing myself. To what extent is that Gateway API going to evolve as different pressures are applied onto it to support different features?
And I think it's worth calling out that the Ingress API is not good. It's it's very much underspecified, underdefined. And I know, like, you know, when Dave Cheney was doing the first version of Contour and he was looking at, say, the regex support that was, you know, part of the Nginx Ingress, he's like, well, flavor of regex, right? And that's like, that type of ambiguity is really all over the place in the Ingress world. And so really locking that down and getting crisp about, you know, these extensions, these capabilities, moving away from these untyped annotations, being able to bundle up the set of extensions into coherent wholes. I think that's a lot of good stuff that's coming down the pike here with the gateway stuff.
Super. Sorry about that. I'm really curious to know, and I want to give you the opportunity to opine on this, because this is a project in its genesis. No code's been written yet. There are goals. There's a design document. I noticed on the GitHub repository. And so a lot of things are ahead of us. I sense a lot of positivity. And so I want each of you to maybe, what is your message to the wider community, not just consumers, but the other companies who might have sort of you know, invested in their own sort of product to support Ingress in one fashion or another? How would you address them? What is your message to them? And my question is to all of you.
Well, I can say with respect to Contour, you know, we've been reaching out to the large Contour users and making sure that they understand where this is going. And I think, like a lot of things, you know, we're not going to leave them in a lurch, but also I think they understand that, you know, a bigger pool to swim in is really going to benefit everybody. And so there may be some transitions, and we're going to see our users through that. But you know, having a lot more folks, you know, put their efforts behind one thing is going to lead to a better outcome for everybody.
Yeah, I would strongly echo that. Hopefully, sorry, my battery might die, so I'm going to talk next. Yeah, it's kind of the same answer for Istio, right? I mean, within Istio, we went through several API revisions as well in the same domain, and, you know, learned many things as we went along. You know, now that, particularly the Kubernetes Gateway API is this big standardization effort within the community, we're happy to throw our weight behind that while we'll carry the existing Istio users forward. And then, you know, the Gateway API, a lot of work went into that, to designing for extensibility. And that should suit both vendors and customers, right? Because they can have standardized attach points. You know, there can be alternate implementations, and customers can use the same attach points to kind of standardize how they might want to integrate something that maybe they're integrating with a CI/CD pipeline behind the same interface, right? As an abstraction that they want to build out. You know, certainly larger kind of deployments do that type of thing pretty regularly, and this will help them like have a more consistent base of infrastructure sitting on top of.
Yeah.
Okay, well, go ahead, Varun.
Mostly echo what Joe and Louis said. I think the test will be when the extensions to Gateway API start to get listed in terms of what's needed, and how quickly as a group we start to use those extension points and start to actually fulfill use cases for people outside Cube as well, and try to, you know, meet those use cases by extending Gateway API and doing that faster. Hopefully, as a community, as a group comes together, we will be able to move faster and iterate faster on the Gateway API as well. And the thing I'm hoping for is more people coming together on the same pace is going to lead to a much better, sustainable, long-term outcome than 10 things just done by 10 other companies, and long-term sustainability then becomes questionable.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add beyond what was already said, but I think this is one of those cases where people might look at the repo and they'll say, what is this? There's no code. I think it's important to appreciate how much work went into making that repo with those 3 markdown files. There's a lot of people coordination required to make that happen. And as everyone else was saying, there's certainly cost, to doing this. But if one company or organization had gone and made yet another ingress controller, it would barely be making any noise at all. I mean, because it's just yet another ingress controller. So I think that there's some cost here. And yes, now people have to go write the code and actually agree. And I'm hopeful that we can do that fairly efficiently. But if we're able to do it, I think the benefit not only to the end user and to end customers, but to companies who can now focus on providing value, that can actually generate revenue. And this comes back to our previous conversation, which is open source is great, but open source has to lead to company revenue in order for a company to actually invest in it. I think that there's going to be more potential for people to focus on features and functionality that end users are going to pay for. So I really do believe that this is in everyone's interest, from the end user to the sponsoring companies, but we'll see.
Yeah. I can totally see how maybe it's even harder than writing code to get a bunch of companies to agree on a set of principles to move forward. So maybe the hard task is done, and maybe it's all downhill from. And so I'm really want to wish the project good luck. But it's almost reminiscent of I once got Dave Thomas's version of how the Agile Manifesto came to be. Apparently, all the participants of the Agile Manifesto got together in, I think it was in Colorado, for a weekend, and they spent an entire weekend. And by Sunday, they realized they hadn't agreed on anything. And so finally, somebody stepped up and said, before we leave, we must at least come up with a common set of principles that we all sort of stand behind. And that's how they published that manifesto. So I see that as perhaps an inspiration, maybe a similar replay of events that is leading to a better place. So I'd like to give each of you just a chance for any last words. I'm going to probably finish with something I was trying to do at the beginning, which is to give our audience a number of links that they can go to read more about this announcement. And but before I do that, please, I'd like to give you the floor one more time.
Well, I'll start. I mean, I'm just excited. This is just the start, both for this project, but also thinking about how can we find other, nuggets that we can extract and actually build implementations around. Super exciting stuff. So I just can't wait to see how the project evolves and what comes next.
Envoy has done an amazing job, right? As it's an amazing piece of infrastructure. It's a really strong community effort. Multiplied by getting to a much better place in terms of network API standards, right? That's community driven. I think is going to be a huge benefit to the industry at large. It's I don't know exactly how it's all going to play out, but like all the signs are that this is going to be really, really big.
Yep. To me, this is like, the best that we have in terms of cloud native compute and the best that we have in terms of cloud native networking. They ought to work better together. And that should be how it should have been from the start. And so it's going to be, and I'm confident we can move ahead with speed among the engineers within the projects as well, because guess what, they've all done this before. So they should have they all have learnings and experience that they have seen. So hopefully that all goes in fast, and driven by end users goes even faster. So I'm very optimistic.
Yep. Again, I don't have too much to add. I guess my statement would be much simpler, which is that anytime I hear of anyone using a non-Envoy piece of software for network ingress, it just hurts me. So I think this is a great opportunity for rectifying that.
Well, we'll try to do our best to meet your expectations. Louis, I'm so happy that your laptop battery made it through the entire interview. And gentlemen, I really want to thank you for your time. Very, very much appreciated. Thank you for coming on, and thank you to our audience. And I'm going to sort of segue to sharing my screen and sharing with our community just a list of links. You're welcome to stay on, of course, or if you'd like to drop off, you're welcome to do it at this time. All right. Bye-bye, guys. You're very welcome. Yep. Thank you. So to our group, I would like to share with you a number of links. Give me just a second to, yeah, here we go. To bring this up. Okay, so thank you for being with us. Again, this is Eitan Suez with Tetrate Tech Talks live from Valencia, Spain at KubeCon. I hope you enjoyed this interview. And I'd like to just really quickly go through a list of links, and I'm going to, those are actually up on our landing page as well at the Tetrate Tech Talks landing page, which you will see in just a moment on our screen. Right there. So the first tab that you see here is Matt Klein's blog post from Monday introducing the Envoy Gateway. The next one, and this is just a small selection of the larger conversation that was triggered by the initial announcement, is how the new stack reported on this very announcement, which I think the title really captures very much the effort, the idea of standardizing on Kubernetes ingress. This is right here, the GitHub repository for the Envoy Gateway project. There's not much there, but definitely read the goals, read the, there's a design doc under the docs folder. This is Tetrate's blog post pursuing the announcement. And finally, if you want to learn more about the Kubernetes Gateway API, you know, this is, again, I mentioned still in alpha stages. There it is on your screen, and again, it is on our landing page as well. This diagram, I think, goes a long way to explaining the design of that particular API as it currently stands. All right, and then finally, maybe we'll bring up our Tech Talks page one last time and mention what we've got coming up tomorrow. We have episode 7 of the Tech Talks, where we'll be discussing sort of my personal report of my attendance at KubeCon, specifically my attendance of Tetrate's immersion. On Tuesday, my attendance of the Service Mesh Con, and a lot of what I saw and learned during the week. So stay tuned for that. And again, thank you for joining our live stream, and we'll see you hopefully tomorrow and in future episodes. Bye.